Have you ever opened a Korean textbook, learned a bunch of new words, and then when you tried to actually speak them, it just sounded kind of weird? We're going to fix that today. We're going to take those stiff, dictionary-style verbs and turn them into the natural, real-life Korean you need to actually hang out and have a real conversation. And you know the best part? This isn't going to be a complicated grammar lesson. We're going to do it in just 2 super simple steps. First, we nip off one small part. And second, we stick on a new polite ending. This is all about learning one simple pattern you can use over and over again. Okay, let's get right into it. So, our starting point is what we call the dictionary form. You've definitely seen this before. It's how verbs look in, a dictionary or your vocabulary list. Words like 가다, to go, or 먹다, to eat, or 하다, to do. Think of this as the basic raw ingredient, but we're not quite ready to use it in a conversation just yet. Because here is the key. The big difference between textbook Korean and how people actually talk. If you walk around saying 가다, 먹다 in a conversation, you're going to sound a little, like a robot. It's not technically wrong, but nobody really talks that way. To sound natural and friendly, we need to switch to what's called the polite form, which uses this simple yo ending. And the great news is, we just have to tweak the word we already know. No new vocab needed. Okay, let's jump right into step 1, finding the verb stem. And this is the easiest part of the whole thing. It's the foundation for everything else, but it's simple. So, how do we find this verb stem? All you do is you chop off the ta from the end of the dictionary form. That's literally it. So, you take a verb like 가다, snip off the ta, and what are you left with? 가. That little blue part right there, that's our verb stem. All right, let's do a few of these real quick so you can see just how easy this is. 가다 becomes 가. 먹다 becomes 먹. 보다 becomes 보. And 하다 becomes 하. See? Step 1 is done. You've already got it down. Awesome. Now that we have our verb stems ready to go, it's time for step 2, adding that polite ending. This is where the magic really happens, and we're just going to learn 2 simple patterns that will make you sound so much more natural. Okay, our first pattern, let's call it pattern A, is for any verb stem that ends in a consonant. Like 먹, or 이르, or 입. For these, you simply add 어요 to the end. So, 먹 plus 어요 becomes 먹어요. Now, 일 and 어요 becomes 읽어요. And 입 becomes 입어요. But what about for any verb stem that ends in a vowel? Well, that brings us to pattern B. What you need to add to the verb stem will depend on what vowel the stem ends with. Looking at this table, if the verb stem ends with a, we should add 아요. If the verb stem ends with 오, we also add 아요. However, if the verb stem ends with 우, we should add 어요, and so on. Let's go through each of the vowels more thoroughly. If the verb stem ends in a, we should add 아요. 아 combined with 아요 simply becomes 아요. The vowels are the same, so Korean simply drops one. For example, the verb stem of 가다 is 가. Combined with 아요, it becomes 가요. The verb stem of 자다 is 자. Combined with 아요, it becomes 자요. Let's head to the next vowel. If the verb stem ends in 오, we should add 아요, 오, and 아, then blends into 와. Let's pause the lesson for a bit and talk about this blending. When making different verb conjugations, Korean often combines or blends vowels together to make the pronunciation smoother. This is called vowel contraction. An example would be blending 오 and 아 to make 와. E and turns into ya. Notice how the vowels kind of smush together? You'll hear this kind of sound blending all the time in Korean, and you'll hear more vowel contractions like this later in this lesson. For now, just listen to the sound and get comfortable with it. Let's hit play and continue. If the verb stem ends in 오, we should add 아요. O combined with 아요 becomes 와요, as O and 아 blends into 와. For example, the verb stem of 보다 is 보. Combined with 아요, it becomes 보아요 and blends into 봐요. The verb stem of 오, 다 is 오. Combined with 아요, it becomes 오아요 and blends into 와요. Let's head to the next vowel, 우. If the verb stem ends in 우, we should add 어요. 우. Combined with 어요 becomes 워요, as 우 and 어 blends into 워. For example, the verb stem of 주다 is 추. Combined with 어요, it becomes 추어요 and blends into 줘요. The verb stem of 배우다 is 배우. Combined with 어요, it becomes 배우어요 and blends into 배워요. Now on the next vowel, E. If the verb stem ends in E, we should add 어요. E combined with 어요 becomes 여요, as E. And 어 blends into 여. For example, the verb stem of 마시다 is 마시. Combined with 어요, it becomes 마시어요 and blends into 마셔요. The verb stem of 기다리다 is 기다리. Combined with 어요, it becomes 기다리어요 and blends into 기다려요. Now, let's move on to one of the most common cases. If the verb stem ends in 하, we should add 여요. 하 combined with 여요 becomes 해요, as 하 and 여 blends into 해. For example, the verb stem of 공부하다 is 공부하. Combined with 여요, it blends into 공부해요. The verb stem of 좋아하다 is 좋아하. Combined with 여요, it blends into 좋아해요. Let's review. Here is a table to summarize what to do for pattern B. If your verb stem ends in a vowel, if the verb stem ends in a, add io. A and io blends into io. For example, 가다 becomes 가요. If the verb stem ends in 오, add 아요. 올 and 아요 blends into 와요. For example, 보다 becomes 봐요. If the verb stem ends in 우, add 어요. 우 and 어요 blends into 워요. For example, 주다 becomes 줘요. If the verb stem ends in e, add 어요. E and 어요 blends into 여요. For example, 마시다 becomes 마셔요. But if the verb stem ends in 하, add 여요. 하 and 여요 blends into 해요. For example, 공부하다 becomes 공부해요. So, what do you say we put this into practice right away? I'll say the dictionary form. You pause and try to say the polite form yourself, and then I'll give you the answer. Ready? First up, 가다. Go ahead. It becomes 가요. 먹다. What do you think? 먹어요. How about 보다? It becomes 봐요. And finally, 하다 becomes what? That one is 해요. How did that feel? You're doing great. But listen, this is where it all comes together and gets really exciting. The skill you just practiced, changing a verb into its polite form, is way more powerful than you might think. We're about to see the magic of Korean. Okay, so here's the magic trick. In Korean, one verb is already a full sentence. That single word you just created, like 가요, isn't just a changed verb, it's a whole sentence. It can mean I go, I'm going, you go, or they go. In Korean, you often leave out subjects like I or you if it's clear or obvious from the context. So you didn't just learn to change a word, you just learned how to make a full sentence. So let's see how this works in real life. If you want to say you're eating, you can say 밥 먹어요. Literally, it means I eat rice or I'm eating. If you want to say you're drinking coffee, you can say 커피 마셔요. Or if you're studying, you can say 공부해요. You are literally building real, useful sentences right now. But what if you want to ask a question? Okay, this is my favorite part because it's simple. The word itself doesn't change at all. The only difference is the intonation. Listen carefully. If I say the word with my voice going down at the end, 먹어요, that's a statement. I'm eating. But if I say it with my voice going up at the end, 먹어요? It's a question. Are you eating? It's all in the intonation. How cool is that? All right, it's time for one final challenge to make sure all this sticks. Take a second and try to change the following verbs into the polite form yourself. Remember the steps. Find the stem, check for a consonant or vowel, and add the right ending. 마시다 becomes 마셔요. 오다 becomes 와요. 하다 becomes 해요. So, just remember the dictionary form is where Korean verbs begin, but the polite form is where the real speaking starts. And here's your practice tip. From now on, whenever you learn a new Korean verb, don't just memorize it. Immediately practice turning it into a polite sentence. That is how you're going to make this feel like second nature. And just like that, you're ready to start having more natural conversations. So I'll leave you with this question to think about. Of all the words we practiced today, which one did you like changing into the polite form the most? And why? Was there one that just felt satisfying to say? Thinking about stuff like that can make learning even more fun. If you enjoyed today's lesson, remember to like and subscribe. We'll see you in the next lesson. Come hang out in Korean again soon.